Technically, I should have played Wailing Caverns before I played Dead Mines. It's slightly lower in the level range, but it's not a big deal. For the most part, Wailing Caverns isn't really a boss test for the players. It has some crowd control challenges, mostly into trash mobs, but for the most part, Wailing Caverns feels like a navigational challenge more than anything else. It's not necessarily the most complicated dungeon design possible, but it does require you to kinda make decisions during your run. When I played this dungeon, I did not use Atlas. I used Atlas to see what bosses there are, but not where they are. I've played this dungeon twice over my entire history of this game, so it's not very familiar for me. So I did actually have to navigate a little, wonder what I'm actually doing. In almost all dungeon parties I've played with in this game, we've always tried to avoid unnecessary trash fights. It's just something that people don't really want to put much time into, even when there's rewards involved, which is experience and the chance of loot. So, when Wailing Caverns has so many split paths where you have to decide, do we actually want to go there and fight all those guys? It forces some decision making for the party. The bosses themselves are very simple. 4 of the bosses are just these druid guys who they're pretty much just buffered versions of those other druid trash mobs in the dungeon. Both of them can cast a hibernation spell on your party. They can cast lightning bolts and they can heal themselves. And each Fang Lord, which are considered bosses, is capable of doing all those things. One of them I think transforms into a serpent, but I think for the most part they just might have some stronger melee attacks compared to the trash mob versions. This one uses Thunderclap, which can deal damage to your team, but they are very simple fights, so I'm not really going to talk much about them. You have to kill all 4 Fang Lords if you want to pick in the event to summon to the end boss of the dungeon. I didn't really have any trouble with all these bosses in the dungeon, but I did wipe a few times to some of the trash mob encounters. I didn't really record those, since I mostly wanted to record the bosses, but after playing the dungeon I felt that I shouldn't talk about the bosses as much as I should talk about the dungeon itself. There's one particularly rough situation where you have to fight 5 elites, and 3 of them are capable of doing crowd control on your party. And that part was particularly tough for me. The interesting bit here is that I actually did play this dungeon 3 times. The dungeon event for summoning Mutanus is extremely difficult, at least for a multiboxer like me who doesn't use any scripts. And I never managed to successfully complete it. I'm going to talk about it more later, but it did lead me into trying it many times. If you fail it, you have to reset the entire dungeon and kill all the 4 Fang Lords again. So I did repeat the dungeon a few times. And during those repeats I was able to reapproach those different crowd control situations. And on my 3rd run, I finally managed them without wiping my party. And that's the big success I got out of this dungeon, really. While not being able to even fight Mutanus was the big failure. My mage of course has the polymorph spell, but my druid can hibernate enemies and my rogue can sap enemies. Of course have some limitations, like the hibernation only works on beasts and dragonkin, while polymorph only works on beasts and humanoids. Sap, I actually forget what saps works on, but I mostly use it on humanoids. Humanoid targets are generally more dangerous than beasts. Initiating a battle with the sap is a little challenging, mostly because sap can't be used inside combat. And inside dungeons, if you start a combat encounter, then your rogue is going to be dragged into it as well. So you always have to start with setting your druid and mage the polymorph and hibernate. And before they finish their spells, you will sap the target with the rogue. And then rush in with the warrior to engage whatever targets are left without crowd control. Even more for Word and the Ever Living, I was expecting something tougher, but Everything he really seems to do is this entangling root effect which can mess with your melee DPS, and that's really it. Of course, if my party was level 18 or 20, they would have tougher time, mostly because of the stat difference, but I'm confident I could defeat this guy pretty easily anyway. It's a pretty simple fight. The cool thing about Verdun isn't really the fight, but it's how the dungeon loops back to the beginning. There's a hole behind him which you can jump down into a pool, which is very close to the entrance of the dungeon. I really appreciate how the designers really clearly wanted you to loop this entire spiral upwards and then make your way back to the beginning and wrap up whatever you need to wrap up. Of course, it's always possible that some of the bosses are bugged, because this is private server core from 2019, I believe. But I did some Wikipedia digging and I'm not sure if there's any bugs surrounding those elements. For the most part, the loot that I got didn't improve my character's gear all that much, but I did get a few useful pieces. And here's my first attempt at the Mutanus event. This one fails really spectacularly, because I'm not really sure what's going to happen. As I said before, I've played this dungeon twice in regular parties, so I don't know what's going to happen. This is where I realized that there's this elite mobs, and I CC them with my mage. An exact similar situation happens earlier during this escort event. 3 of these serpents attack the escortee, and you have to protect him. So when I saw the serpents, I at least realized, okay, this is going to be the same thing. Now, the serpents aren't such a big deal. Just course control them, and then kill them one by one. But we are on a clock here, because next the game is going to spawn like 9 of these slimes, and that's what really surprises me. And I'm not sure what to do in this situation. As you can see, it's complete panic. And the escortee dies and the event is over. The dungeon has to be restarted all over again. I did another attempt. This time my strategy was that my mage is going to use AoE on all those guys and kill them swiftly. So I'm going to start the same way. Use crowd control on these guys and then kill them one by one. I know I'm not going to have time to kill all 3 of them, so I'm going to focus on killing 2, then I'll crowd control the last one and take care of the slimes before Mutanus spawns. This is where I make a mistake, because instead of bringing the mob over to the center, I'm leading my party out of the center. This means that those 2 slimes are going to attack these guys, which messes up with my pace a little. I try to pull out them out of my mage. But my mage gets fucked up, obviously, and so does the escortee. So that's really it. And there's not really much I can do here. Even if I was using scripts, I wouldn't really be able to fight all those guys effectively. And I'm not even sure how a full party would handle that situation. One thing I could do was set several characters apart so that the slimes are going to aggro them first, and then try to keep their attention with those characters, just enough for my mage to take care of the ones who make it to the center, and then clean up the rest. And I could try that, but I'm really not interested in doing a 4th run of Wailing Caverns just to try that one event, so I'm giving up on it. If I was playing with 3 mages, this situation would be a lot more simple. 3 flame strikes would almost kill the whole crew, I might lose a mage, but that's not really a big deal. I would be able to handle that situation pretty fast. But that's also boring. I don't want to play with 3 mages and a tank and a healer. I want to play with a RPG party. So I'm willing to make sacrifices here. Now if this was a serious challenge, like the terms are you have to beat every dungeon and every boss in those dungeons, then yeah, I would have failed the entire thing by now. But I just want to play these dungeons. So I've technically failed the challenge in that sense. But if I beat every boss that I can from now on, that doesn't have a similar situation where there's just something that you physically, one person can't handle, then I've done more than I'll do if I give up now. So I'm going to move on to Shadowfang Keep next after I level up my characters 2 levels to 26, and then I'll do that dungeon. The final boss of that dungeon is going to be interesting with multiboxing, and I want to see how that goes. Anyway, I'm a little disappointed in myself, but I just want to see what else I can do during this journey. As usual, I don't really expect anyone to watch this, but if you did, thanks for watching, and see you again.